Hello, everybody. This is Arnold. This is the Cherry Hill Seminary Podcast. Cherry Hill Seminary serves pagan and nature-based communities by providing high-quality education, allowing students to succeed academically and lead spiritually. My guest on today's episode is called Banu. She is a practitioner of Kemetic Reconstructionism. Banu, if you can please introduce yourself to the audience and give us a little overview of what is Kemetic Reconstructionism.
Sure. My name is Banu. I have been a Kemetic Reconstructionist for probably about 25 years now. I've been pagan for almost 30. And a Kemetic Reconstructionist is someone who practices the religion of ancient Egypt, but they try to do it in a culturally focused and historically as accurate as possible way. Uh, Reconstructionism is a branch of the pagan family tree where the practitioner studies the history and the culture of a particular uh, part of the earth and tries to reconstruct the religion of that time in a way which is appropriate for modern times. So there are Kemetic Reconstructionists like me, there's also Celtic Reconstructionists, Norse Reconstructionists. I've even met some Druid Reconstructionists and Hellenic Reconstructionists.
Okay, thank you so much for explaining that. I'm very excited to have the conversation with you today. Thank you so much for being here, by the way. When you had mentioned attempting to reconstruct the ancient religion, at least in on your path in this area of Kemetic Reconstructionism. How easy or difficult is that, considering how ancient the religion is and was? I mean, how confident can practitioners be that what they are practicing is as close to reality as possible?
Thank you, and I'm excited to be here too. Um, we actually are very fortunate as Kemetic Reconstructionists because the ancient Egyptians felt that writing was sacred. And so they put a lot of their rituals, a lot of their philosophy into writing. And we have these writings covering the insides of temple walls. So if you think about just the Temple of Karnak, that that temple is large enough to fit an entire cathedral inside of, and the walls are covered with ritual texts, and not only ritual texts, but also drawings of the king performing these rituals. So we have ritual gestures.
Mhm.
So it's a wealth of information. It hasn't all been published, but if you have access to that information, you can try to uh, put together a complete ritual. But the difficulty in performing the ritual is that these ancient rituals were performed by groups of priests. It wasn't just one person doing the ritual. So they had kind of a complex choreography of groups of priests who would be in different parts of the temple at the same time doing different parts of the ritual. And then they would come together in a group effort, maybe to do one particular ritual, and then they'd split back up and go their separate ways to continue. So I am very fortunate that I had a mentor and friend named Richard Reedy, who is a master's of divinity, and he studied these rituals and he wrote them. He kind of rewrote them in a streamlined fashion so that a single person can perform the core elements of these rituals. And it really is the core elements of the religion that we're at, because as you can imagine, this religion lasted over many, many, many years. And so the form of the rituals and the form of the religion might vary a little bit from one year to another or from one century to another. But that was mostly in the the point of who were the major gods that were worshipped at a certain place at a certain time. The rituals themselves tended to stay as close to the originals as possible because the ancient Egyptians were also kind of reconstructionists in that they felt that the way things were at the beginning, at the start of the world, was the pure and perfect way for things to be. And they didn't believe in new and improved, I'm afraid. They uh, they saw any innovation on the original form as being kind of a corruption of it. And so they would keep libraries of ancient rituals, ancient temple blueprints, and they would try to keep as close as possible to the original as they could. So, in knowing that, we're able to take these rituals off of the temple walls. And we know that we are not ancient Egyptians. We are not living in ancient Egypt. And there are some things that will have to be changed. We're realists in that fact. But it is possible for us to carry forward the meaning and the spirit of the religion if you understand why they did it. And that's where studying the culture really comes in.
Hmm. And so, um, in the modern context, do you think it is more common for people to be solitary practitioners when they practice Kemetic Reconstructionism? Is there a large portion of practitioners who kind of seek out the group aspect or dynamic of it? What do you think?
We would love to have groups. When I was young as a Kemetic, I was spoiled because there were three major temple groups that were online. There was the House of Nature, Aket Hotor, and Perronk. And all of them had free classes that people could attend to get an idea of what Kemetic religion was and how it was expressed in that particular temple. But nowadays, the only one that is still functioning is the House of Nature. And they are going through some major reorganization at the present. So I don't know what they're going to look like going forward. Nowadays, most comedics are solitary. I was really, really fortunate in that I met Richard, and back in 2007, he invited me to join a temple that he was starting in San Jose. And I was with them from 2007 until about 2020, 2021. I was in two separate Kemetic temples. There was the Kemetic Temple of San Jose and the San Francisco's Temple of Ra. Um, and I got to interact with Kemetics on a group level, which is very important because for us, the most important concept within Kemetic religion is this thing called Ma'at. And Ma'at is basically a system of relationships in harmony and balance. Ma'at includes other people, animals, the land, plants, also gods and the spirits of the dead. So you want your relationships with all of these entities to be in balance and in harmony. And an act of Ma'at is one which helps to restore the world as a healthy place to live, where society functions in a responsible and useful way and everyone is treated fairly. So it's hard to be a solitary Kemetic.
Mm.
You can do the rituals and you can do meditations and you can do prayer and offerings, but there is a certain point at which you need a community to interact with. And a lot of Kemetics today find that community online, or they interact with their local community in a way which I guess the local community may not know that they're Kemetic, but they still are interacting with them in a way to try to create that community as a healthy place for all members to live in.
Right. In my personal history, I, in my mind, some of my first introductions to paganism was through like Wicca in the around the turn
Me
of the
too.
millennium. Yeah. So I keep putting my questions and thoughts into this context of how similar or different is this to what would be known as Wicca, and I'm wondering, is there like for people to become practitioners of Kemetic Reconstructionism, is there like a degree system or an initiation type of process, like a year and a day type of process? What kind of commitment is that, or is it something that is, immediate upon performing some kind of action or making some kind of decision?
In order to be Kemetic, the only real requirement is that a person do the best they can to live in Ma'at.
Mm,
And Ma'at, as I said, is just a way of keeping the relationships between yourself and the people around you, yourself and the land you live on, yourself and the animals around you, keeping that all balanced and healthy. So there's no real initiation. Different groups may come up with their own initiation because people like to have some sort of rite of passage,
right.
but it's not necessary. Um, there are many different types, many different expressions of Kemetic religion. Reconstructionism is just one of them. There's also a group called Tamaran Wiccans, and they are Wiccans who worship the gods of ancient Egypt, and they kind of blend Wicca and Kemetic religion. There's uh, different uh, degrees of Reconstructionism. It's kind of a spectrum, and I view it as a series of cities along a virtual Nile. You know, some of
Mm.
them are closer together and might speak the same dialect. Some of them are far apart and have very little in common except for Ma'at and the gods. And that's okay. They're all part of Egypt.
Great. And you've mentioned a couple times the word nature. Is I mean, I imagine that the ancient Egyptians would have been much closer to nature than we are today. But is how big of a role does that play in either the ancient religion as it was practiced? How much reverence did they have for nature, and or today as it is practiced in under Reconstructionism?
To the ancient Egyptians, their gods were immanent in nature.
Mm.
And it seems appropriate to me that the ancient Egyptian word for God, neter, is so close to nature. The ancient Egyptians probably would have appreciated that. They really liked puns.
Mm.
But
Okay.
being close to nature is, in my in my personal practice, very important because I take cues from nature. I see a well-balanced ecosystem as being a model for Ma'at. I see my relationship between myself and the animals as being very important. So I always make sure that any meat that I'm going to be offering on my altar is humanely raised and processed. I may not always be able to afford to eat that in my personal life, but if I'm going to offer it, I do try. I do make that effort to make it humanely raised and processed. I try to use organic foods. I have tried to learn how to restore the native plants and native
Mm.
pollinators in the area where I am living. And to me, this is all just part of Ma'at. So
Right.
nature, as you said, the ancient Egyptians would have been very close to nature. They revered it and they lived and died by it. So it's very much a nature-centered religion, even though it often doesn't come across that way immediately when you
Right.
when you are just looking at it for the first time, because it's a desert country and you think, well, what kind of nature can there be in the desert? But along the Nile was a very large store of animals and ecosystems. The ancient Egyptians were well aware that they needed to respect those ecosystems in order to continue to survive. There's a class of literature known as the wisdom literature, which you can study to get ideas of what is and is not Ma'at. And in one of the wisdom literature, it talks about not obstructing the flow of the river so that water can get to those who are downstream from you. It talks about not denying the cattle their pasture because they need that to be healthy and survive. Yeah, it's
Definitely.
just it's nature was very important to the ancient Egyptians, and it is important in the expression of Kemetic religion today.
And so is there something like a wheel of the year is what I'm thinking, like how are holidays or not even holidays, but the turning how is the turning of the seasons recognized modern in the modern expression?
Is a very important or a part of the religion which comes up a lot because the ancient Egyptians had different seasons than we did. We have, of course, our spring, summer, fall, winter. The ancient Egyptians had inundation, growing, and harvest. They only had three seasons, and they were based around the activity of the river and the land around the river. So the year starts out with inundation, and that's actually the Kemetic New Year is going to be coming up pretty soon. Or if you calculate the New Year for Memphis, it'll be coming up on August 7th. And that starts off the season of inundation when the river is swelling, it's covering the fields, it's bringing in that vital silt and the fertile soil. But it's also a very dangerous time because it can sweep away your house, it can sweep away your children. So it's considered to be a time of great potential and renewal, but also it's kind of a time of some anxiety and peril as well. Will the river flood sufficiently? Will it flood too much? Will we be able to plant our crops and have enough to eat for the rest of the year?
Mm.
And then that gives way after 4 months, that gives way to the season of growing, which is when the crops are planted and they're developing. There's 4 months of that during which there aren't a whole lot of holidays because the people were busy farming and taking care of their crops. And then there's the season of shomu or harvest when they're bringing that harvest in. There are a few holidays that are important to pretty much all Comedics. Wep Renpet is the opening of the year. So that's that New Year's that I was talking about that's going to be happening on August 7th. There's the beautiful feast of the Western Valley, which is um, it's a celebration of the spirits of our beloved dead. Where people go to the cemetery and they have meals with their loved ones, and they thank them for their role in their lives and their continued role in their lives, because we believe that the ancestors, when they pass on, or the Aku rather, we call them Aku, not ancestors, when they pass on, they haven't left. They still intercede on our behalf with the gods, because they, as spirits, are now living in a place which is closer to the gods. So we give them thanks offerings of thanksgiving. We talk to them. We just celebrate their presence. Then there's the beautiful Feast of Lights of Nit, which is a gorgeous ritual where we have water that we float lights on, and we ask Nit for intercession with needs that we have during the year. And I think, oh, and there's the Mysteries of Wasir, which is the celebration of Osiris's death and resurrection. And the it's kind of a metaphor not only for the way that we now can identify with Osiris when we die and get an afterlife through his resurrection, but it's also a celebration of the plants that appear to be dead, especially around that time of year, because it happens around December in our calendar usually, and it it celebrates the resurrection of the plants and the new life that's going to be coming from them.
Mm.
But there are so many holidays. Each temple had their own calendar of holidays. And what you see when you look at Kemetic calendars today is usually a collection of every holiday that has shown up on any temple wall uh, anywhere in Egypt. And it's more rare than not to have a day where there isn't a holiday or there isn't some sort of special celebration. And you can just take a dart and throw it at the calendar and it's going to land on a festival somewhere. And that's just
Mm.
too much for most people to be celebrating. So what we do is we take the gods that we're interested in and we pick out a few festivals that are in honor of them and put those with the big holidays that I just mentioned. And those are the holidays that we celebrate. And we may not know what the ancient Egyptians did for those holidays. Sometimes it's up to modern innovation to come up with a way to celebrate them. Sometimes we know a little bit more about it. For me, one of my major goddesses is Bastet, and she has a holiday which is called the Day of Chewing Onions for Bastet, which is very descriptive.
Mm.
And so I celebrate that by eating as many onions as I can in the dishes that day. I have a feast of onion dishes, and the onion itself, I reflect on its symbology. It is round and yellow like the sun. If you cut it open, it has many layers, which represents eternal life, the emanation of life. Um, and it has a very strong scent, which we uh, compare with the breath of life.
Very interesting. Yeah, I was curious to also ask you about I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but perhaps like your personal pantheon, because I do know that the ancient Egyptian pantheon was pretty large, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yes.
Can you kind of explain how perhaps you were called to the gods that you embrace and interact with the most?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Actually, that is a subject when people are new to Kemeticism, they talk about, well, how do I choose my God?
Mm,
Um, and a lot of people feel like you need to have some sort of permission almost from the gods, a sign inviting you to worship them. And what I have found, and what my mentor, Richard Reedy, also used to agree with, he has passed on and gone to the West now. But during his life, he would say that the gods flirt with us. They have they catch our eye, they catch our attention. There's something about them which resonates with us. And this is really the only basis that you need for choosing a god. You choose one that resonates with you. And so when I started out with Bastet because I have a deep reverence for cats. I always have. And I felt that they really embodied the divine, the mysticism, the beauty, the grace, and also the power of the divine. I thought that the ancient Egyptians really had the right idea about them. So I chose Bastet as my main goddess figure. And at the time, I was Wiccan. And so I tried to find another deity to serve as my god figure. And I chose Pan to be my god figure. And that was my pantheon for a while. But as I went along, Bastet introduced me to other Egyptian gods. And I think that this is one of the ways in which you can find who is the right God for you. Just start with one. And if they're not the right God for you, they will help you find the right God. So Bastet introduced me to Jehuti or Thoth. I've heard the name pronounced both ways, but he's the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing. And uh, Anpu, Anubis, kind of slid into my pantheon via a gift of a statue from someone. And then when I started to study as a priest, I was called to the service of Sekhmet, and she was the first goddess that I was a priestess of, or a priestess in training. I never actually finished the training. I decided that I really prefer the layperson's approach to the religion. There's the layperson, and then there's the priest. And the priest is responsible for doing ritual every day, pretty much. That the ritual is the purpose of a priest. And I did not have the time or the resources for that. So I decided to be a layperson and just do ritual as I was able.
okay. You had mentioned also the relationship between the Egyptians and the dead, and I think that this is pretty common in perhaps non-American cultures, where, like you mentioned, the dead are not gone; they're just somewhere else. What does the relationship look like for the modern Reconstructionist? Would it be common to find perhaps death altars for family members who have passed on? You had also mentioned when you mentioned the passing of your mentor, you had said gone to the West. Can you explain the symbolism there?
Yes. Well, in the in the ancient Egyptian religion, We follow the course of the sun from rising to its strength in the middle of the day to setting in the west when it
Mm,
goes to the underworld, when it goes to be with the spirits of the dead, and then it rises again. And so when someone dies, we say that they have gone west or they have gone to their horizon. It's a beautiful way of expressing that transition in life. And
yes.
yes, it is common to see death altars. We call our dead the Aku, or singular for that is Ak. And the word Ak means both shining and effective. And it's shining in the sense of a star, which is a symbol for the spirits of the dead. We believe that the ascended spirits become stars in the sky where they watch over us and they live with the gods. But it's also means effective, as in their magic, their power is effective in intervening for us. So when we have a need, especially a need that is a very human need, it is more common to go to the Aku and ask them because the Aku know what it is to need to pay rent. The
Mm.
gods have never had to pay rent. So if you have a problem with your job, or if you have a problem with your budget, or if you have a problem with another family member, you might go to the Aku first and ask them to intercede. And only if they are unable to help you fix a problem, then you go to the gods.
Mm.
So the people who are your Aku are not necessarily just your blood relatives. They can also be friends, they can be teachers, they can be anyone that you respect enough to want to honor in that way.
And so, practically speaking, what would a ritual or a prayer look like? Are there any perhaps tools that a practitioner might have, on hand to perform a ritual or a prayer or a type of uh, magic petition? Practically speaking, what would that look like?
Okay. Well, you can make it as fancy or as simple as you want to. I Another question that I often get asked is, how do I pray to the gods? And personally, for me, I like to start out with a few titles. So for Ma'at, some of her titles are who gave this land at the beginning, who keeps the land alive through the activity of her arms, who removes evil, one lives by her. And then after I have said a few of their titles, I feel like that's a very polite way to get their attention. And you can also customize the titles if you know a lot of them. You can customize the titles to match whatever it is that you're going to be asking for or thanking them for, so that you get kind of that aspect of them who is more sympathetic to your goals. And then after that, I just talk. I just say, thank you so much for your presence in my life. Please help me to be the best human that I can be. Please help me to live by your laws and bring the highest good to the people around me. And then I might add it with or end it with a word like thank you, or let it be so. Or even if I'm feeling like I want to use an ancient Egyptian word, I would use the word keperu, which means may it become, or it becomes. But there are tools that can be used. You can have an altar, and an altar would consist of an image of the deity, whether that be a 3D image or a 2D image, whether it's something that you purchased or something that you made. It is traditional to keep that image inside of a either a cabinet or to cover it with a cloth to keep it clean and protected. And then it's uncovered or the cabinet is opened when you are praying. Uh, it is common to have a candle that you light when you're talking to the gods. Incense is very common as well, especially frankincense or myrrh incense. There's also a blend of incense which the ancient Egyptians called kapet, and it is a blend of incense which was used in the temples, I believe, especially in the evenings. But it's a very pleasant scent. And we might give libations of water. We would give offerings. One of the most powerful offerings, in my opinion, is just bread and water. And water because it is the stuff of life. And we can't live without water. Water is cool, it is refreshing, it is rejuvenating, especially to a, a god who originates in the desert. That's going to be a precious substance. And then the
Right.
bread, to me, is a beautiful symbol of the cooperation between the gods and humans, because the gods give us everything that we need to make bread. They give us the seeds for the grain, they give us the fertile earth, the wind, the sun, the water, and then humans tend that crop and we harvest it and we process it and we make it into this thing called bread, which is the staple of human culture and nourishment for both humans and the divine for thousands of years. So there's a partnership between humans and the divine, which is um, renewed and rejuvenated every time we interact with them through ritual, through prayer, through offering. And that is probably the backbone of the practical side of religious expression in Kemetic religion.
Great. Thank you. Um, One question I get for my own spiritual path is people will often ask, I think you had mentioned this, where, sometimes the people who are new to a system are looking for like permission, or they want to make sure that they're doing things right so as to not offend any deities or entities that they might choose to recognize. Is it possible for someone to have uh, a a dual or multi-devotional life? Could you be a practitioner of Kemetic Reconstructionism and then also perhaps be initiated into something else?
Yes, the problem, definitely the problem, if there was one, would not be on our end. Our gods are not jealous gods.
Mm,
They are, as long as you are living in Ma'at, and most religions, they want to teach you how to be a good person, right? So it's very rare to find a religion which is going to conflict with Ma'at. It is definitely possible to have dual membership in religions. And it is also, in my experience, very hard to offend the gods.
mm,
They are very gracious. They understand that we are humans and we make mistakes. And that's why in our afterlife scenario, we have the judgment of the scales. Like some, you may have seen a picture of the deceased being led to this huge pair of scales, and there's Anubis is there, and he's weighing the heart against the feather of Ma'at. And the things that weigh your heart down are the actions that went against Ma'at in your life. And the feather of Ma'at represents all the things that you did which were in alignment with Ma'at during that life. You're just looking for someone to be more good than they were not. If you were perhaps to make a mistake and you realize that it was a mistake, well, then you have the opportunity to just try to correct it, or if you can't correct it, then just try to try to go forward being more good than you are not, and that'll balance out the scales. So in my opinion, if someone is genuinely trying to be respectful, even if they accidentally do something which would be taboo in Kemetic religion, the gods are going to forgive them. And the gods are not going to be jealous of them giving attention to other gods, whether those be other gods in our pantheon or other gods in other pantheons.
One thing we had discussed in our email communications was the topic of controversy. Um, and so I'm curious, I guess, how would you describe what is perhaps perceived in the modern day as a controversy within Kemetic Reconstructionism?
There's a lot of controversy around race and Kemetic religion, and it is a very sensitive subject because, of course, race is such a huge issue in modern times. And ancient Egypt is undeniably an African religion. In the early days of Egyptology, they actually used to argue that. They used to say that, oh, it's not an African civilization, it's a Middle Eastern one. And and ancient Egypt is, of course, it's right there on the continent of Africa. The only reason to say that it is not an African religion is racism.
Hmm.
And that is something that when people of color come to study ancient Egyptian religion through Egyptology, if they get those early Egyptologists, they get a big taste of racism. And it's very off-putting. That has changed a lot in more recent years as members of social anthropology topics such as Egyptology have come to realize that their own biases were skewing their ability to appreciate the culture on its own level. People have made an extra effort to make sure that they are not bringing their own personal bias into the religion, whether that be the bias of race or the bias of religion or the bias of modern values, so that the ancient culture can really speak for itself. And there's also a phenomenon uh, today where there is a group of people who are people of color, and they have they are descended from, let's face it, they are descended from slaves who were brought over to the United States. And when they try to follow their heritage back, they eventually end up with a person who has been stripped of their identity, stripped of their heritage, and they can't trace it back much further than that. And that's something that I, as a white person, could never understand. I could never understand the devastation that that causes someone. These people know only that they came from somewhere in Africa, and our school system doesn't teach very much about Africa. We see it as this dark continent that the English colonizers came and they set up colonies in certain places, and now we think of it as like a third world area. But there was this African culture in ancient Egypt, which was absolutely amazing. And everyone in the world respects it. Everyone is in awe of ancient Egypt. And so they claim this as a kind of foster heritage. And some of them feel that I, for example, as a white person, should not be allowed to worship the ancient Egyptian gods because with my race, I'm not from Africa. I am an outsider.
Mm.
And I will be the first to admit that the ancient Egyptians were not white. There is also a big controversy over whether the ancient Egyptians were white or black. Um, my personal opinion is that it's somewhere in the middle, that they were their own race. But a lot of people, when they hear that, they immediately think that, oh, well, you are racist against Black people and you think that they're white, or that the ancient Egyptians were white. And that is absolutely not the case. They were definitely people of color. And I recognize that and I respect that as a white person, that I am very much a recipient of a gift from their culture. And I don't make the claim that I have any kind of ancient Egyptian blood. I don't make the claim that we have any kind of direct line back to ancient Egypt. I'm just in awe of what they have to offer. And I think that their philosophy and their culture should be taught more in our schools.
One thing I have expressed in the past, spiritual, and this is just for my own spiritual path, and people who might have questions about how I express my spirituality. There is some of this appropriation conversation that happens. And one thing that I like to remind people is that you are not, no individual person is responsible for engaging in conversations or controversy that they don't want to, especially around something as personal as spirituality. And so, what I like to say is that people only know how you express your spirituality when you express it openly. And if potential uncomfortable conversations bother you, perhaps backlash, you don't have to express that publicly because your spirituality has nothing to do with any other human. It's a relationship between you and the divine. Um,
Absolutely agree with that. Religion is such a personal thing. I feel very strange about talking to my religion to someone who is not, who doesn't have a personal use for that information.
mm,
Um, and I find that I am oftentimes, but because of this controversy of race in ancient Egypt, I find that I am often more afraid of talking to a person of color about my religion than I am afraid of talking to someone who is an evangelical or a
mm.
fundamentalist of another religion.
Wow, that's a very honest statement. Thank you. And so, do you have any advice, I guess, for someone who might be navigating that controversy? How, because I would imagine, I'm just taking a guess here, but I would imagine that once they hit that topic of conversation, many people just turn off the switch and they say, I'll find something else. Any
Yeah.
opinion on that?
Well, the ancient Egyptians actually had a very different concept of race than we have today. They would have found our hangups on skin color to be a little perplexing. To the ancient Egyptians, race was culturally defined. So if you were willing to come to Egypt and engage in traditional Egyptian activities and traditional Egyptian cultural norms, then you were considered to be Egyptian, culturally or racially Egyptian. So I think that if we can approach ancient Egypt respectfully and understand them on their own terms and try to bring that culture through vibrantly into the modern day, into modern light, then we can kind of sidestep the issue of race, um, or we can at least gracefully deal with it in a way which would have been unoffensive to the ancient Egyptians. And I think that's the most important thing.
Right. Very good point. Um, okay, and so for someone who is new and wants to figure out or find out more about Kemetic Reconstructionism, are there any uh, texts or books or speakers that you might recommend someone who is new look into?
Well, my mentor, Richard Reedy, has published two books of rituals,
Mm.
and they are called Eternal Egypt, and the second one is called Everlasting Egypt. So if you are into ritual and you're looking for something that is historically accurate as possible, that is definitely what I would recommend. There's also an Egyptologist named Eric Hornung. He has published a text called Conceptions of God in Ancient Egypt, the One and the Many, which I highly recommend. It talks about the expression of religion in ancient Egypt, and it also tackles uh, the question of whether they were polytheists or monotheists, which
Oh.
is another controversy in ancient
Mm.
Egyptian religion. Um, Spoiler alert, I think they were polytheists.
Okay.
But and there's also Siegfried Morenz's Egyptian religion. Siegfried Morenz and Eric Hornung are both German Egyptologists, but they are printed in English. Actually, I could give you an entire list of recommended reading if you wanted to link to it from notes if you have notes in the podcast.
Yes, actually, when we publish it to yeah, I can put the any titles or any links that you have to share. I can definitely put those in like the video or in the podcast description. So if you want to send them over either by email, I'd probably email would be best. Um, and then for the audience listening, if you're interested in this list of resources, check out the description wherever you're listening to this. Okay, that works. That's wonderful. Um,
Great.
okay, Banu, I think we've gone just about an hour, I think a little over. That's great. I think it was a great conversation. Do you have any parting words for the audience?
I don't, but thank you so much for letting me come on and speak about my religion and get the word out there to people of who we are and because it's we are a small group within the pagan community. Like we often aren't represented, so I very much appreciate you giving us a voice.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate you speaking on the topic. I think it was wonderful. Anybody out there, members of the audience, if you found this discussion to be of value, please consider making a donation to Cherry Hill Seminary. You can do that at cherryhillseminary.org. And if you would like to learn more about the degrees, certificates, and courses that Cherry Hill Seminary offers, please visit cherryhillseminary.org/academics. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, bye.